So I'm gonna start with more personal questions first. So can all of you share one of the most touching stories that you have when you interact with your beneficiaries? So let's start from Pedro.
I think all the stories are passionate. I think there's once you get involved as a task force, the UN, ESBN, with all these initiatives, it's great to kind of create all these things and to get all the media attention and so on. But what's really great is to see the impact. Is to see the one story of the person that after the program or after the event or after whatever we have been conducting come to us and kind of say, you know, that really made a difference. And it may be in very small things. Say, for example, on the World Virtual Fair program that we've done, where we brought all these startups from 11 countries from Asia Pacific all the way Pacific Islands to Central Asia, we had companies that couldn't even articulate the business proposition. They didn't have a logo, they didn't have anything. So we kind of supported them to have, helping them to have a virtual stand. And because of that, they were able to connect with companies from Europe, from US, and from all over Asia Pacific, with potentially that if it wasn't through this initiative that we conducted, they probably would go through the normal vehicles, which was kind of waiting for the international fairs to go to their country. So I would say that the passionate story is not a story, but it's a story with an S at the end, which is the real impact that people, entrepreneurs, and small companies come to us and say, this really changed because ...
Thank you so much. Scott, please.
Yeah, so I think I like what he said a lot, because I think a lot of times as social entrepreneurs, you want to feel good about what you're doing, and sorry, that started to sound weird. So you want to feel good about what you're doing, and I think at times we can all be guilty of relying on those stories or those moments a little bit too much. Because part of making the shift from being the on the ground, me answering the phones like I was saying, to now having that business be autonomous, is that I couldn't be reliant on those stories, right? So because if you need that beneficiary interaction day in and day out, you're never going to be able to delegate effectively to your team. And so, the story, so when we're doing that, I think we just need to be careful, because if we let that be the driving force for social entrepreneurs, they're going to be social small business people, not social entrepreneurs, and they're not going to grow big. Now, the biggest, kind of my favorite story is one where a worker came to us after placement, and she'd gone through the training center and the agency, so she'd gone through the whole gamut with us. And she sent a picture of, she'd been in Hong Kong for a few months. And initially she had said she was going to go over to Hong Kong from the Philippines, and she was going to work, and her husband was going to stay at home, and she was going to support all of her extended family, and they were going to be awesome, right? And this is a really unsustainable plan for most of these workers. And so at the training center, they focus on getting as many of your family members earning income as possible, right? We don't tell everybody to return and be an entrepreneur, because the number of people who can do that successfully in these poor communities is going to be really slow or small. We say, how can you get them to make money? And she'd been in Hong Kong just a few months, and she texted a picture of a motorcycle tricycle with a little side cab next to it, and said, I've reached my first goal. My husband now has a job, right? And that's what it's about, right? It's not about this person who's in this. It's about making sure that person doesn't fall into a situation of forced labor, and that it's providing them a path that they can be middle class, which means they need to get everybody in their family earning an income. And that's one of the stories that really kind of sticks with me, because I think that shows the scale that we can get to over time.
Thank you so much, Scott. Ani?
Well, I think after what the other two panelists say, well, I have to share one story. I agree. I think we get asked a lot to tell the stories, and it's hard to see that wider change. And when now it's 5th year into Lensational, I really lost touch with the beneficiaries, because I have to be very high level and be strategic and be working a lot with the team and guide them to be doing the delivery rather than me doing the delivery myself. But one of the most touching stories for me was quite early on in our first ever program, which was held here in CUHK in May 2013. It was with domestic workers from the Philippines and Indonesia, and we still serve this group until today. One of our most talented students from the Philippines, I mean, a very typical story from rural area, very talented, but had to give up her education, and she's lesbian, which added much more to the challenges that she faces in Hong Kong. And 2 years into training with us, she then went on to train other women. And one day she told me on Facebook that she decided to move away from Hong Kong. And she said she's been considering it for a long time. The only thing that was keeping her from leaving was the community of Lensational, because she felt valued for once. But the other thing that made her want to move is that she wanted to have more adventures in her life. And she had to continue to be a migrant worker. She found this opportunity in Russia. And she said because of Lensational, she feels the world is her oyster. She knows that she has friends from all these different countries that she can count on, and whatever she does, that she will continue to be able to have this community. And that for me was really touching, because I was very just focused on, the photography training that we give her, how I can lead her onto work through photography. But I never thought about this community aspect, and I never thought about this ability to give her something that she did not dream of. And now she's doing really well in the Philippines. She's a freelance photographer. She's been invited to take the portrait of the ambassador from the Philippines to Russia, which is a huge honor. And she started also our program in Russia. So I'm very proud of her. But Jem's story is only one of the many stories. And it's important to have these stories because it helps people relate to it. But and so that would be one I share, but not losing sight of the overall picture and how change could really be created at scale.
Well, thanks, three of you, for sharing those stories. So what I've heard just now is that actually all the panelists want to focus more on long-term impact, right? So because if we all focus too much on individual success stories, then we might lose the whole picture, the oversight, and also how we build the structure and everything. So I agree with all of you. That is a really good point. So, well, in that case, let's forget about the good story side. Let's focus more on the hardship.
What are some failures?
Yeah, exactly. So I want to know about what are the challenges and also hardship that you have been through, specifically on maybe engaging your beneficiary or engaging with young people. So, Petra, would you start?
I think one of the big challenges is the cultural shift. So it's, for example, from our side, when we speak about entrepreneurship, we move from a model of a very simple binomial, which is you do something, you make money, you sell the company, and you retire, and you're happy forever, which is great for the magazines, but only a minority does that or can help to achieve that. But what we're seeing is that from a cultural perspective is kind of to understand how going beyond this kind of profit equation and introducing the SDGs and the impact into the corporation and into the startups. I think that's point number one. And then point number two as well is what we also found, especially in Asia Pacific, not so much on the what we call perhaps the more developed countries, the Singapores, the Hong Kongs, and so on, but other countries is where to start your own business you may not have the best support from your family. So also from this kind of family pressure. And I'll give you a very straight example. One of our teams that won the business lab, the MBA business lab last year, 2 years ago, they were actually involved with government, they were involved with big corporations, they were senior executives, and then they decided to launch their company. But they were so excited after the program that they decided to launch 2 startups. They're kind of focusing on agriculture in the center of the city. So I remember the gentleman came to me and he said, I think you're going to have a chat with my father, because after the MBA, my father was expecting me to go to senior management of PwC, Citibanks, and Goldman Sachs, and so on. And here I am as a CEO of a startup that we don't know if it's going to make it or break it. So I think that these 2 points I would like to bring, which is one, it's the understanding that to be part of a startup goes beyond just making money, and you actually can make a lot of money while still contributing to the SDGs and to contribute to impact. Understanding that you're actually creating and constructing the world that you and your generations will live in. But on the second hand is also how can we somehow bring all this impact to the younger generations beyond just the traditional route, which is go to university, get a job, have 1.2 kids, have a happy family, live happily ever after.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. Scott?
Yeah, so, I mean, we've screwed up a bunch of things. We've made a bunch of mistakes. None of them have been huge because we've had the support, the board thought that has gone into kind of our decision making. Now, instead of digging into any specific detail, I want to talk about the importance of that. Because what happens, what I have found, early on, Jennifer, one of my co-founders came and said, Scott, you got great potential, you got this, you're good at this, that, and the other, but you're stubborn. And it's going to be what holds you back, right? Because you have some people that want to work with you, but other people won't, and you're going to tend to gravitate towards this group of people, and it's going to hurt you. I was like, crap. But again, it's somebody who I respect her as a human being. I want to be like her. And so I took that step back and said, okay, this is really important. And so I started to reshape how I thought about things. And I started to get that feedback, and I looked for it. And what happened is, and then I started to involve more of these people in my decision-making process. And what happens is, as you involve people that have more experience in your decision-making process, it allows you to be less defensive of the mistakes you make, right? Because then instead of trying to justify after you made a mistake, you can say, well, we knew there was going to be challenges here, we knew there was going to be challenges here, looks like we're wrong, that sucks, right? And they say, yeah, that sucks. But instead of something where I have to go and constantly have to fight, right? And then as we've done that, we've set the tone of the board where that's very comfortable as well. And so I think those decisions and those mistakes that you're going to make, it's learning to learn from them and learning to accept them, and then being kind of at peace with them. And what I've found is that when you do that with investors and donors, they love it. If you want to get somebody to give you money, list them off the mistakes you've made, which I realize I've not done here, but they're pretty specific, so I don't bore people. But that's one of the things that I think is really critical, because if you just try to tell them what's great, they know that everything's not great. Like, life's complicated. And so I think that's one of the things that I would really focus on.
Thanks, Scott. Bonnie?
So I think one of my main challenges, I look at Scott in awe because we're the same age and he's so much more confident than me. And that's one of the big challenge, I think, especially for Lensational, when we were kind of plunged into the global stage. I met a lot of other entrepreneurs who grew up in a very different culture where they were encouraged all the time to speak up, to ask questions, to boast about themselves, and it's very challenging.
Was that a subtle cut? Subtle dig there?
And of course, there's English just being my second language and all those complications. So I had to really go out of my comfort zone and try to be as confident as many other entrepreneurs that I see. And I think there's a gender element in it as well, that there are fewer role models for women when it comes to entrepreneurship, and there are more in social entrepreneurs, but still when it comes to kind of the gender balance, I think that was something that I struggled earlier on. And so when I had the opportunity then to be a role model for others, I tried to take it, but I think then the other challenge is it does take time away from me doing the work. And it's that kind of fine balance, how much advocacy do you want to do to sow the seeds for among young people, among women who might, one of them one day be really big, versus day-to-day doing the work. And then I think it's being young, you have less experience choosing what is best, and when you're young, you are less good at saying no or prioritizing. And so that is the point of trying to surround yourself in the core team, not just among advisors, but in the core team, surround yourself with people who are very different and who are experienced. So this year, we brought in a very experienced chief operating officer. She's 20 years into her career, and that helps with making some of those prioritization, and for also me to then really focus on being that spokesperson, doing the business development, and not trying to be pulled in too many directions.
Thanks so much for the sharing. So what I've heard just now is that actually 3 panelists were talking about one overarching issue, which is the culture of startup entrepreneurship ecosystem. So in UNDP, in Youth Collab, we also see that culture is one of the 5 important pillars to build a thriving entrepreneurship ecosystem. So what Petro just mentioned, the mindset, the culture among the parents and the mindset of the young people, and also what Scott mentioned, the mindset of accepting failure, be open-minded to failure, and what Bonnie mentioned about the culture of the gender, the female entrepreneurs. Those kind of things are actually what we want to focus on, and also very important for building a thriving entrepreneur ecosystem. At the same time, we also heard that to create this ecosystem, we need people who has years of experience to work together with young people, to join hands, to collaborate. So, so my next question would be, as a person who has years in this ecosystem, and we also mentioned about social innovation as a movement, as a larger wave. So what are some of the current or some of the trend that is within this bigger wave that you observe over the years? So let's start from Petro, please.
I think when you spoke about people with a lot of experience, you're not calling me old, right? You're not calling me a very old person here. That's fine. I think what we're starting to see, and what we didn't see at the beginning, was that is this kind of the creation of players within the ecosystem that are actually making the ball spin faster. When we started with the task force and the ESBN and so on, what we realized that we had a couple of pivotal countries that had something going on that was not so much shared, and then whenever we wanted to do something in different countries, then we had to almost reinvent the wheel. I think that what we're seeing today is we're seeing institutions and organizations like the UNDP, your team, the guys from ESCAP with the task force and so on, and also the civil society and the government, that they're somehow making the ball spin faster in their countries. We also are a big believer that creating this kind of synergy, creating this synergy between organizations is critical. We believe that, for example, even as task forces, I showed in my presentation, we have a couple of flagship initiatives, but what we have in the majority is this kind of collaboration initiatives. And I think that within our task force, for example, we identified 5 stakeholders, which are the government, the chambers of commerce and the entrepreneurial associations, corporations, academia, and then the startups themselves. And we believe, and our goal is to kind of ensure that we first, as a first step, without being arrogant, without kind of having to tell how to do things, but to recognize in each country what's being done, what are the case studies, what are the success cases, what are the organizations already taking place, and then somehow leveraging from what other countries may be doing. And so I think that this kind of synergy between organizations is what's allowing all of this to happen. And if we look at 2 years ago to today, the speed of it has increased, I would say, 100-fold.
Wow, thank you so much for the sharing. And Scott?
Yeah, so for me, I think it's kind of similar. I think that there's oftentimes people who've engaged with social issues have been fighting against something, right? They're fighting against a system, so they need to kind of portray themselves as this, this warrior for whatever cause, right? And I think that what we're seeing is a little bit of a paradigm shift, where I think that most people in public office, whether you agree with them on a certain policy or principle or execution of it, most people are trying to do the right thing, right? And what we've seen a lot of success with is approaching government as if they're good people trying to do the right thing, instead of with some kind of antagonistic attack approach. And we've seen governments be very, very responsive to this and change entire policies because we've done this. And I think that's one of the things that I think is this incredibly low-hanging fruit that all organizations should be thinking about. Instead of building the campaign that's attacking a government, we should be looking at building, offering to have a meeting with them and asking them what's important, and then addressing what's important to them instead of telling them what we think is important and trying to solve our own problem. Because most of these people are well-meaning people that have really hard jobs. these government officials, they're being pulled this way and that way. And so they need easy wins, and they need people who can provide those recommendations. And so I think that's been the really encouraging and exciting thing to me.
Thank you so much, Scott. Bonnie?
Well, being in kind of social entrepreneurship in the past 5 years, I think one trend is definitely there's much more interest in this topic from young people, from even younger than university, right? Secondary school students and or high school students. So that I think is really exciting. The number of events just on social innovation every year across the world is just exponentially increased. But that poses its own challenges because it's just around interest, and I think we really need to translate that interest into real sustainable action. I don't want people to see this as just a new way of getting into a bank, and just to have a competitive edge on their CV, but really to see it as something as their lifetime vocation and not seeing it as utilitarianism. So that's, I guess, one comment on the trend, which is both positive but a double-edged sword. The other trend, a bit of buzzwords, but yes, like as you mentioned, blockchain and artificial intelligence, all these disruptive technologies and their application to social innovation. I see a lot of potential in it. Similar comment as the first trend, I think is still around in the interest phase, and I'm yet to see really practical applications that is different from any other types of technologies that we've talked about. But in that area, I've seen, for example, Google, they've put a lot of money into this. They have an AI challenge where they're looking at how you can use artificial intelligence to solve the SDGs. So allowing, getting social innovators working together with engineers or people who are more tech focused, I think bringing in those interdisciplinary teams to create social enterprises would be the next step, and that could be really exciting because it captures imagination of the much more for-profit focused investors who really still hold the money, and then I think we'll get many more resources into the social space.
Well, thank you so much for the sharing. So I think definitely all three of you agree that no matter is development agencies, government organization or employee or technology, a lot of players are coming and joining this movement, and a lot of them being very active. So following what Bonnie just mentioned, there are challenges of how do we transform those awareness into action. So also, last question from my side is that how can people engage with all of your organizations? For example, how do people join the ESBN, and how, I know your foundation is more with migrant workers, but how can general public also be part of it? And also, how should we engage with Lensational? Of course, go to the website. So yeah, can you share with us a little bit more how people can join?
I'm just going to grab one of two words that Bonnie said at the end of her last remark, which is understanding and excitement. I think that we're going into an era that things are changing so fast that if there's no understanding, we're causing a lot of confusion here. We're having the changing of jobs, we have all this automation, we have all these kind of now crazy startups. I mean, I'm a teenager, I'm about to go to university, or I'm finishing my university. Where should I go? Shall I go for my startup and get stuck? Shall I go to a normal company? Shall I go to all these fintech and all these kind of new stuff? So I think that these two words are critical for also the program that we run, which is the understanding first, which is kind of the capacity building, the understanding, and also the excitement. We have to bring the excitement, otherwise we don't capture the imagination of the new generation. And having said that, the way that people can connect with us, the 5 stakeholders, is we do have a task force. The task force has its members. We're always looking for increasing the number of members. Now, of course, to be a member, you have to then also have the other side of the membership, which is you have to also contribute. But we also have a very comprehensive global network of supporters. which are people that are not officially part of the task force, but they kind of somehow are collaborating with our programs. They kind of join the programs, the initiatives, they run it in different countries. So we would like to make this invitation. And for those of you that are interested to know more about what we're doing from the ESBN, the UN ESCAP Sustainable Business Network level, which is, even though based out of Bangkok, but kind of focus on these 63 countries and associate member countries, just go to the website www.connectyet.org, contact page, send me a note, and our team will reply to you, and let's see how we can work together.
Thank you, Pedro. Scott?
Yeah, so like you said, our organization is primarily, it's working with domestic workers. We hire a lot of recent graduates. You know, we're a team of 23. I think our average age of our company right now for full-time staff is like 25 or 26 years old. I'm, I think, the oldest member of the staff at a raging 29. And so if people are looking for jobs, I think it can be a really good opportunity to see a company like this work. Those jobs are mostly kind of customer or service oriented. We also have internship opportunities if people want to get involved working with the foundation. So if either of those. And then also just telling your friends to use us or telling your family members to use us. I think that what they mentioned about technology, the technology can be good, but it can also be kind of scary. And right now there's this idea that this is a process or that this business should be done online, and it shouldn't. A lot of these online platforms are just becoming human trafficking platforms for bad guys. And so when you look at it and you hear those stories, I think it's important to start to acknowledge it and bring it up with your friends that not every problem can be solved or should be solved with a tech platform, right? Technology can fit into it well, but it's not what's going to solve a lot of these problems. So that's it.
Thank you, Scott. Bonnie?
So, yeah, as you said, go to our website. So Lensation is a volunteer-led organization. I've shown my organizational chart. So if you're interested to volunteer, you know, do get in touch. We're always interested to hear from people willing to give time. I also think there's so many opportunities out there for people to get involved with. One of the organization that I really like myself is SDSN Youth. Lensation was actually featured as a SDSN Youth Solutions. I have a few friends at SDSN Youth. I think it's just a great way. If you don't know about the cause area that you're passionate about, it's good to get involved in these like ecosystem players so that you get exposure to many different innovations, and as you grow within that role, you have a better sense perhaps on the issue area that you're really passionate about, and you can go deep, or you get clearer on what your expertise is, whether it's communications or finance. You have some kind of expertise that you can then go on to join other organizations to offer. So it's while I'm sure our respective organizations would love to hear from you, I think it's also for you to understand what you think your value add is, and for you to then be able to find the thing that you can have the most rewards from.
Thank you so much for sharing. So if you're interested, check out the website of the ESBN website and also the task force, and spread the word of the Fair Employment Foundation, and also check out the job opportunity. At the same time, check out the Lensational website and join the volunteer program. So that's what I have in mind, what I want to ask for the panelists. Did I ask all the questions that everyone have in mind here? If not, now is the time for you to ask the questions. We'll now open the floor to the audience here to ask questions.
Firstly, thank you everyone for sharing today, and obviously all your organisations are contributing towards the SDGs. There's not really any standardisation towards like impact and metrics. I just wanted to find out, in your respective organisations, which are the key impact metrics that are most important to you for this sustainable long-term action, as you called it, towards the SDGs? Thank you.
So in my consultancy, I do a lot of impact measurements. I can have another speech about impact, just on impact measurement alone. But recognizing the need for standardization, there's been quite a few movements. One I think UNDP is also involved with is called Impact Management Project. So it's a multi-stakeholder project trying to understand what various stakeholders are using to measure impact and then be able to create kind of standardized language for different sectors to talk together. So that's one initiative to check out. Of course, the SDGs also has, I think if maybe you can correct me, I think it's 169 metrics under those 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Of course, those metrics are quite high level because they are not speaking specific to all kinds of interventions under each SDG, but that would also be another way to start. We started measuring impact just from the perspective of our organization, what our theory of change is. And as I mentioned in my speech, we have emotional empowerment, economic empowerment, and advocacy. I would say as a social enterprise, the economic empowerment metrics are also our business metrics. So what our key performance indicators are, which are around the number of photos sold and the percentage of photos taken versus sold and conversion rate, etc. So I think in social enterprises it's also important thinking about impact metrics alongside your business metrics and as much as possible to merge them together.
100% agree with what she just said. I was like nodding my head like this. I think a lot of times people waste so much time with impact measurement when the reality is if you're creating a great business that creates great experiences for your clients and you want to know what your clients are thinking and what they're feeling and what they're doing, you're going to generate those feedback loops, right? So we were lucky that Jennifer, one of my co-founders, this was her focus from the beginning, and so we kind of baked that into our KPIs, and so they're really one of the same. We're going to look at placement numbers, success rates, broader industry movement, but all those things are information that our business wants and needs, right? And so it pushed us to get some of that feedback. Now, sometimes when you start to get that feedback, you find that you're not as cool as you think you are, which happened with us early on. But that also was a good thing because it allowed us to better understand the market. But I think the key is don't try to create an impact division of your company. It's integrated all together so you don't have people tugging and pulling at each other. And you're not trying to gather two sets of information, totally separate information that could be the same.
I'll just bring three points to this question, which is that the first point is many of the initiatives and programs that we do when we bring the SDGs, the first question is SG what? So I think before we kind of bring the metrics, what we try to do in our initiatives and the program is kind of to explain what the SDGs is with some of the benchmarks and examples and some of the metrics that the what has done. And once they realize that, there's a second part of the equation, which is how do we create these metrics? How do we somehow create these valuations? I mean, in one hand, we've got this very high level and very detailed level of metrics from the UN that we also abide by. And when we have the meeting, we're going to have the next meeting on the 3rd of December, the task forces meeting in the UN in Bangkok. We're going to bring all our initiatives and kind of equate to these metrics. But we also realize that we have to be a bit careful to ensure that the SDGs does not become another CSR on the kind of the propaganda thing. So I'm doing CSR just to have a little bit of press. It looks good for my stakeholders, and then what my business is nothing to do with what the CSR is. So we're trying to kind of get the idea of the ingraining the SDGs inside at the core DNA of the companies, both the stakeholders that we consider for our task force, but also for our startups. But at the same time, we're understanding what kind of new KPIs may be originated that we never thought through from different initiatives. And they can be very small, they can be a bit on parallel, they may combine 2 or 3 SDGs, and I think that's the beauty of the SDGs, is that in one hand, we've got a very detailed set of SDGs with the metrics set up, but at the same time, we have the practice of it, we have the implementation, and we then start kind of creating different types of metrics that we can then bring back to the UN for potential expansion to other programs.
Thanks for the question. Any more from the audience?
Thank you. Thanks, Linka, and the guests for everything so far. I have one question. As social entrepreneurship or social innovation is relatively new, young people growing up, they don't really learn about that in schools or from parents. So some people have weird ideas what it's about. Even from our own social enterprise, we remember hiring people who have no idea what social enterprise is, and maybe after a year think, oh, we thought it's more about helping people in need, or oh, we thought it's more about being fancy on social media. Are there certain things from your own experience, maybe when you were even younger than you are, when you are young and naive, or maybe you hired people who had totally different misconceptions about what social entrepreneurship innovation is? Do you have any lessons learned or any myths you want to say that's totally not true, or hard lessons that you learned over years that actually social innovation is entrepreneurship, I never thought about it, but really it's a lot about this or that? Any lessons for young aspiring social innovators?
Thanks, Dale.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and it's a difficult one to answer. I think social entrepreneurship, it does bring people from very different political kind of interests. Like in the UK, it will be the left and right do come together when it comes to social entrepreneurship, and that also means they have different ways of thinking about how society actually works. And we have a lot of debates, for example, in the UK that I'm exposed to, that the left would think that the right tries to get rid of some government responsibilities through outsourcing public services to social enterprises. And then the right would think that the left just sees this as a way of increasing social welfare. And so I think it is a unifying force, because people who are previously not talking together are now talking together. Similarly, businesses talking to civil society through this kind of unifying force of social enterprises. But that also means we should not forget we should not question some of the assumptions underlying what we're talking about, and we should be open about the motivations of people joining social enterprises. Indeed, there are, for example, I've come across people who are in this because they want to be famous, they are in this because they want to get rich, and it's seen as a less competitive space to get rich when it compares to the technology space. So, and I would previously consider these to be ulterior motives. When I was starting young, I just thought everyone's in it because people really care, and I was naive, and I then realized that actually some people just come into this from more utilitarian motives, which are also fine. But understanding that, then that's their motives, and how do we work around that? So, in short, social enterprises are, because of its definition, it brings people together. Therefore, you are indeed speaking very different languages in terms of what people understand to be important, what they might prioritize, is it financial return or social return. So let's question and have open discussions around those underlying assumptions. Then you'll be able to build a more conducive way forward.
So I'd say for us, the trick has been hiring those people that see something in between, because there is kind of an NGO feeling and there's kind of a business feeling, and you need that something in between there. We found it hard. People that have real high-level touch NGO experience can struggle with us early on, because we have a culture where we need to find people who can create successful work environments. And like I mentioned earlier, it may mean that we don't help the worker who has the saddest story, right? So part of our culture code is kind of understanding that. And the way I explain it to people, we're not a religious organization, but there's a Bible proverb, and Jesus is talking, and he's like, hey, if you have 100 sheep and you lose, when you take 99 of them to your location successfully and you lose one, you need to go back and get that one and bring it with you, right? What I tell people is we're not Jesus, right? Our job is to get the 99 as far as we possibly can, which means there's going to be other organizations, NGOs, and these high-touch organizations that are going to do really important work, but they're going to focus on those one and getting that one to us eventually. The goal is for us to get that group as far as we can. And so it's finding that balance can be tricky, but I also think that the idea of social enterprise being new probably isn't. Social enterprise as a word is new, but it's been going on for a long time. Like if we think about how services have been delivered, the services that we all need and love and require, those have all been delivered by businesses for a long time, right? The only difference now is we all have them and there's a group that doesn't, right? And so those initial businesses that provided those services, I would argue, could have been considered social enterprises knowing what we know now. And so we just need to be careful when we use the language like this being really new, because I don't think it is particularly new.
I think your question touched the nerve point here, which is The SDGs, I mean, is this a new CSR? Is this a new code that everyone has to abide by and do something? There hasn't been one incubation or entrepreneurship program where, when we spoke about bringing the SDGs into the equations, they didn't come out with one of two questions. First one was, okay, we're going to go to our financial planning and we're going to allocate some money to charity. Okay, that's our SDG approach to it. Or number two, why do I want to bring the SDGs if my business is for profit? Are you saying that I have to convert my corporation or my startup to a non-profit just for this program? So I think that there's this kind of learning. And I would also kind of enhance the responsibility not only for the people that are here on stage, but also for everyone in the audience, because you guys are here kind of listening to the stories, you're kind of thinking about what you do. You may be alumni, you may be doing your internship, you may be in corporations. So you're going to be also responsible for explaining to the corporations, to explaining to your community what are the SDGs and how to implement that. And I would just like to finish this note with one basic point, which is if you watch the videos of the SDGs, there's one with a lot of actors, including James Bond and all these singers and so on, and they all start with "we the people." Okay, so the SDGs have been set up outside the classic, you know, the Boston Consulting Group or McKinsey type of corporate approach. They have been set up in a very easy way that in the end, the goals enable companies and people to kind of benefit. Okay, so the goals are for the people, which includes the people as people, the people as corporations, the people as government, and so on. And I think that the way that they went from the Millennium Goals, they devised the SDGs, have been in such a way that, you know, it's almost very easy for someone to understand, oh, I'm already doing this. Let me see how I can do it better. Let me see how, if there's other goals that I'm probably already doing it as well, I can do it better. And as the worst case scenario, you've got the last SDG, which is partnership for the goal. So how can you somehow support all this? So I would say that these two things, which is, one of them is the understanding and the education, and the second of them is to understand that these goals are for the well-being of the current and the upcoming generations, and not just a corporate or a PR stunt.
Thank you so much. And I also think that it is our mission to making sure that working for SDGs and working for pure corporate is not longer a binary question, right? It's going to be a combined model. So I would like to thank all three keynote speakers for this fruitful discussion, very interactive, and also your active engagement with us on the stage. So we're going to conclude our morning session with a lunch break.